I never thought I would be the kind of person to harbor resentment, let alone act on it. But life has a way of pushing us to our limits, doesn't it? My name is Sophia, and 2 years ago, I was living what I thought was the dream. Lucas and I were in our late 20s, sharing a high-end apartment in a modest city. Our monthly bills totaled around $2,500, a sum that seemed manageable when split between two working professionals. I had started my own business before meeting Lucas, and it was beginning to flourish. I was bringing home around $5,000 a month, a figure that filled me with pride and a sense of accomplishment. Lucas, on the other hand, was a teacher. He'd always been prone to stress, but in our second year together, something changed. The light in his eyes dimmed, replaced by a vacant stare that I couldn't quite place. "Depression," he said. The word hung heavy in the air between us, a tangible presence in our once vibrant home. I remember the moment I made the decision that would alter the course of our relationship. Sitting across from him at our dining table, watching him push food around his plate, I offered to cover all our expenses. I told him to take a few months off work, to focus on getting himself together. In that moment, I felt like the supportive partner I'd always aspired to be. I imagined Lucas using this time to heal, to rediscover his passion for teaching, maybe even to fall in love with life again. I pictured us emerging from this rough patch stronger, more in love than ever. How naive I was. The first signs were subtle. A growing collection of energy drink cans on his desk. The blinds perpetually drawn, casting our living room in a permanent twilight. The pungent smell of unwashed clothes and stale air that greeted me every time I returned home from work. I told myself it was temporary, that healing takes time, that I needed to be patient. But as days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the weight of my promise began to crush me. Our apartment, once a source of pride, became a prison of my own making. The air grew thick with unspoken words and unfulfilled expectations. I would lie awake at night, listening to the click-clack of Lucas' keyboard as he immersed himself in yet another gaming session. In those quiet hours, I'd wonder, was this what love was supposed to feel like? Was this the price of commitment? Little did I know, this was just the beginning. The promise I made, born out of love and hope, would set in motion a chain of events that would test not just our relationship, but the very core of who I thought I was. The transformation of our apartment mirrored the decay of our relationship. What was once a pristine living space became a testament to Lucas' deteriorating state. The air hung heavy with the stench of unwashed clothes and stale food. Empty energy drink cans littered every surface, a stark reminder of the countless hours Lucas spent glued to his computer screen. I found myself tiptoeing around our home, careful not to disturb the fragile ecosystem of depression and addiction that had taken root. The rhythmic clicking of Lucas' keyboard became the soundtrack to my life, a constant reminder of his descent into a virtual world that seemed far more appealing than our reality. At first, I tried to help. I gently suggested therapy, even going as far as to pay for his sessions since he no longer had insurance. After 2 appointments, he returned with a dismissive shrug.
The therapist doesn't see anything wrong with me. There's no reason to keep going.
Undeterred, I encouraged him to seek a formal diagnosis. Maybe medication could help, I thought. He half-heartedly agreed to an assessment, only to return with a vague, "They think I might have ADHD." No tests, no follow-up appointments. Just another excuse to retreat back into his digital sanctuary. The chores piled up alongside my resentment. Every unwashed dish, every overflowing trash bag became a silent accusation. When I dared to ask for help, the response was always the same. A frustrated outburst, usually punctuated by his character's death in whatever game currently consumed him. I found myself running all the errands, managing all aspects of our life outside the apartment. It was as if the world beyond our front door had ceased to exist for Lucas. His family's stories about his childhood began to make sense. The youngest boy, coddled and indulged, given whatever he wanted at the first sign of tears. As months dragged on, I watched helplessly as the man I loved disappeared, replaced by a stranger who seemed content to let life pass him by. The weight of our shared life bore down on me, growing heavier with each passing day. In quiet moments, I caught glimpses of the Lucas I fell in love with, a flash of his old smile, a moment of genuine laughter. But these moments became increasingly rare, like the last embers of a dying fire. I told myself I was being patient, that I was honoring my promise to support him. But with each passing day, with each unanswered plea for change, a small voice in the back of my mind grew louder. It whispered of resentment, of wasted potential, of a future slipping through my fingers. Little did I know, the true extent of Lucas' deception was yet to be revealed. The games he played extended far beyond the confines of his computer screen, and I was about to discover just how deep the rabbit hole went. 6 months into our new arrangement, the tension in our apartment had become palpable. The air was thick with unspoken words and mounting frustration. I found myself avoiding our shared spaces, seeking solace in long walks or extended work hours. Anything to escape the suffocating atmosphere of our once happy home. It was on one of these nights, as I sat alone in our bedroom, that curiosity got the better of me. Lucas' phone lay unattended on the nightstand, its screen periodically lighting up with notifications. Before I could talk myself out of it, I reached for the device. The guilt of invading his privacy lasted only a moment before being overwhelmed by a tidal wave of shock and betrayal. There, in black and white, was a side of Lucas I never knew existed. On Discord, he painted himself as a big shot day trader, spinning tales of financial success and market savvy. The irony was almost laughable. Here was a man who hadn't worked in months, claiming to be a financial wizard. But it was his description of me that truly stung. I was reduced to a, quote, annoying girlfriend, end of quote, who did nothing all day, a burden he nobly bore. My fingers trembled as I scrolled through message after message. Lucas spoke of, quote, taking care of me, end of quote, through his supposed market plays, expressing guilt over the prospect of leaving me due to my, quote again, many issues, end of quote. Each word was a knife, twisting deeper into my heart. But the betrayal didn't end there. As I delved deeper into his online persona, I uncovered something that made my stomach churn. Lucas was using fake pictures to sext girls in the games he played. The face that stared back at me from these exchanges wasn't his, but that of some nameless, more conventionally attractive man. I sat there, phone in hand, as the full weight of his deception crashed over me. The man I thought I knew, the man I had sacrificed so much for, was living a double life. While I worked tirelessly to keep our life afloat, he was crafting elaborate fantasies and engaging in virtual infidelities. The realization was like a bucket of ice water, shocking me out of the complacency I'd fallen into. I had been so focused on supporting Lucas, on honoring my promise, that I had become blind to the truth staring me in the face. As I placed the phone back on the nightstand, my mind raced. The Lucas I loved seemed to have vanished entirely, replaced by this stranger who lied so easily, who used me as a prop in his fictional life while seeking validation from strangers online. I didn't confront him that night. Instead, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the familiar sounds of his late-night gaming session. But now, those sounds carried a different meaning. Each click of his mouse, each tap of his keyboard felt like another lie, another betrayal. In those quiet hours as dawn slowly crept in, something shifted within me. The last vestiges of my patience, of my hope for our future, crumbled away. In their place, a resolve began to form, a determination to reclaim my life, my dignity, and my future. Little did I know this discovery was just the beginning. The path ahead would test not just my resolve, but my very understanding of right and wrong. The knowledge of Lucas' deception weighed heavily on me in the days that followed. I found myself watching him with new eyes, scrutinizing every action, every word. The man I once loved now seemed like a stranger, a parasite leeching off my goodwill. It was a crisp autumn morning when I finally decided to confront the situation. I had spent the night tossing and turning, my mind a tumultuous sea of anger, hurt, and determination. As the first rays of sunlight filtered through our blinds, I steeled myself for what was to come. I found Lucas in his usual spot, hunched over his computer, the glow of the screen reflecting off his unwashed face. The sight of him, so content in his fabricated world while our real life crumbled around us, ignited a spark of anger within me. "Lucas," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "We need to talk." He turned to me, his eyes unfocused, clearly still lost in whatever game had consumed his night. I took a deep breath and delivered the ultimatum I had rehearsed countless times in my head. "You need to get a job." The words hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. For a moment, Lucas just stared at me, as if trying to process what I had said. Then, like a switch had been flipped, his demeanor changed entirely. Tears welled up in his eyes, his lower lip trembling. He choked out, his voice breaking.
I can't. My depression, it's so bad. I can't function.
I watched as he broke down, sobs racking his body. In that moment, I felt a confusing mix of emotions, pity, disgust, and a gnawing suspicion. I remembered his sister's stories about how their parents would give him whatever he wanted if he cried. Was this genuine distress or another manipulation? As his tears continued to flow, I made a decision. A lie for a lie. "I understand it's hard," I said, softening my tone. "But my business, it's not doing well anymore. I can't make next month's rent." His sobs quieted as he looked up at me, confusion replacing the anguish on his face. "In fact," I continued, "the lie coming easier now. I'll likely have to call my sister and stay with her for a bit. My business is online, so I can work from anywhere." The change in Lucas was immediate and stark. The tears dried up, replaced by a look of panic. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" he demanded, his voice rising. "I would have looked harder for a job." I stood there, watching as he frantically began to consider his options. He had no family nearby, no savings, and his credit was shot. The realization that he had nowhere to go seemed to hit him like a physical blow. In that moment, I felt a twisted sense of satisfaction. For months, I had carried the weight of our life on my shoulders. Now, finally, Lucas was forced to confront the reality of our situation. As I left him to process the news, I couldn't help but wonder about the morality of my actions. Was I justified in my deception? Or had I stooped to his level? One thing was certain. The dynamics of our relationship had shifted irrevocably. What came next would test not just our relationship, but the very core of who we were as individuals. The transformation that followed my ultimatum was nothing short of remarkable. Within 2 weeks, Lucas had secured not one, but 2 jobs. A teaching position at a local school and a graveyard shift at a gas station. The man who had spent months glued to his computer screen was suddenly a whirlwind of activity. I watched this change with a mix of emotions I couldn't quite name. There was a bitter satisfaction in seeing him scramble, yet a part of me couldn't help but wonder. Had he been capable of this all along? Had I enabled his behavior by supporting him for so long? As the end of our lease approached, Lucas begged me to renew it with him. His credit was still shot, and without my income on the application, he couldn't secure a place on his own. I agreed, but something had fundamentally shifted in our dynamic. The apartment that had once felt like a prison of his making now became my sanctuary. Lucas was rarely home, dividing his time between teaching, grading papers, and working at the gas station. The silence that filled our space in his absence was a relief I hadn't known I needed. I stopped cooking for him, did only my own laundry. The domestic tasks that had once felt like a burden now became small acts of reclamation. Each load of laundry, each meal I prepared for myself alone, felt like stepping further away from the role I had been trapped in. Lucas, for his part, seemed oblivious to the change. He was too exhausted from his new routine to notice the growing distance between us. On the rare occasions when he was home and awake, he'd ask about my business. I maintained my lie, speaking of struggles and considering moving in with my sister. His response was always the same, a plea for me to try harder or get a real job, followed by a swift change of subject if I mentioned moving out. The irony wasn't lost on me. The roles had reversed completely. Now it was Lucas who was overworked and stressed, while I enjoyed the freedom of our shared space. I found a perverse pleasure in watching him struggle with the reality of adult responsibilities. During this time, I allowed myself indulgences I had long denied. I went on dates, enjoyed nights out with friends, even attended a few parties. The guilt I initially felt quickly faded, replaced by a sense of entitlement. After all, hadn't I earned this? Hadn't I paid my dues during those long months of supporting him? Most importantly, I began to save money. With Lucas covering our expenses, I was able to put aside a significant portion of my income. I used this newfound financial freedom to invest in my business, hiring a small team to help me scale operations. As the months passed, I found myself becoming a different person. The naive, trusting woman who had offered to support her struggling boyfriend was gone. In her place was someone harder, more cynical, but also more self-reliant. I knew that what I was doing wasn't right, at least not by conventional moral standards. But each time I felt a twinge of guilt, I reminded myself of the lies Lucas had told, of the months I had wasted supporting his addiction to gaming and laziness. This new arrangement, this reversal of our roles, felt like justice. It felt like balance being restored. And yet, as I lay in bed each night, listening to the sound of Lucas' key in the lock as he returned from his late shift, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just another form of deception. The question that haunted me was, how long could I maintain this charade? And more importantly, who would I be when it was all over? As our lease neared its end, the weight of my deception began to press heavily upon me. The apartment that had once been our shared sanctuary now felt like a stage for an elaborate performance, with both Lucas and I playing roles we'd never anticipated. The 2 months until renewal letter arrived on a Tuesday. I remember staring at it, the crisp white paper a stark contrast to the tangled web of lies I'd woven. In that moment, I made a decision that would irrevocably alter the course of our lives. I waited until Lucas returned from his evening shift at the gas station. He stumbled in, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. I steeled myself, pushing down the small voice that whispered of guilt and regret. "I'm not renewing the lease," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil within. "I've met someone." The lie slipped out easily, a final deception to cap off months of falsehoods. In reality, there was no one else, just a series of casual dates and fleeting connections made through dating apps. But I needed a clean break, a reason he couldn't argue against. Lucas' reaction was explosive. Gone was the defeated, lethargic man I had lived with for so long. In his place stood someone filled with rage and betrayal. He hurled accusations, calling me a bitch and worse. His words were daggers, each one finding its mark, yet I stood firm. As I watched him unravel, a part of me wondered if this was how he'd felt all those months ago when I had given him my ultimatum. Was this karma coming full circle? In the days that followed, tension permeated every corner of our apartment. Lucas alternated between cold silence and bursts of anger. I found myself retreating to my room more often, avoiding the living areas we'd once shared. Despite the hostility, I wasn't worried about Lucas not paying the final month's rent. He couldn't afford an eviction on his record, not with his precarious financial situation. This knowledge gave me a sense of security, even as guilt gnawed at the edges of my conscience. I planned my exit meticulously. On a day I knew Lucas would be at work, I arranged for movers to come. In a matter of hours, my life was packed into boxes and loaded onto a truck. As I stood in the empty bedroom that had been mine for so long, I felt a strange mix of liberation and loss. I left no note, no explanation beyond what I had already given. As I closed the apartment door for the last time, I realized I was closing a chapter of my life, one filled with love, disappointment, deception, and ultimately a kind of twisted growth. In the months that followed, I threw myself into my work. The savings I had accumulated during my time with Lucas became the foundation for expanding my business. I hired more staff, took on bigger clients, and watched as my small startup began to flourish. Yet, in quiet moments, I found myself reflecting on the path that had led me here. Had I become the very thing I'd despised in Lucas? Had my actions been justified, or had I simply perpetuated a cycle of hurt and deception? These questions lingered, unanswered, as I moved forward into a future I had crafted through means I never thought I would employ. The woman who emerged from that apartment was different from the one who had entered it years ago. Stronger, perhaps, more successful, certainly, but also carrying the weight of choices that would forever shape who I was becoming. 2 years have passed since I walked out of that apartment, leaving behind a life built on lies and resentment. Time has a way of dulling sharp edges, but the memories of those months with Lucas still linger, a constant reminder of how quickly love can sour and how easily we can lose ourselves in the process of trying to save someone else. I'd like to say that I emerged from that experience a better person, that I learned valuable lessons about honesty and communication. The truth, as always, is more complicated. The Sophia who left that apartment was harder, more cynical, but also more determined than ever to carve out the life she wanted. My business flourished in ways I never imagined possible. The team I hired with the money I saved during those final months with Lucas proved to be invaluable. We expanded rapidly, taking on bigger clients and more ambitious projects. Success, it seemed, was the best revenge against a past that threatened to define me. But success came with its own price. I found myself working longer hours, pushing harder, always striving for the next big win. It was as if I was trying to outrun the guilt and doubt that still plagued me in quiet moments. Was I any better than Lucas, really? Hadn't I manipulated and lied just as he had? These questions haunted me, even as I smiled for photos at industry events and shook hands with influential clients. The world saw a successful entrepreneur, a woman who had built something from nothing. They didn't see the nights I lay awake, replaying every moment of deception, every lie I'd told. It was during one of these sleepless nights that I made a decision. I couldn't change the past, couldn't undo the hurt I had caused or the lies I had told. But I could choose how to move forward. I started seeing a therapist, forcing myself to confront the darker parts of my personality that I'd discovered during my time with Lucas. Ironically, it was through this process of self-reflection that I met James. He was a financial consultant at the bank where I was seeking a loan for further business expansion. There was an instant connection, a spark of understanding that I hadn't felt in years. As our relationship developed, I found myself faced with a choice. I could continue the pattern of deception that had defined my relationship with Lucas, or I could be honest about my past, flaws and all. It was terrifying, opening up about the mistakes I had made, the person I'd become. But James listened without judgment, offering understanding where I expected condemnation. Now, as I stand in our new home, engagement ring glinting on my finger, I am struck by the twists and turns that led me here. James works in finance, a fact that still makes me chuckle given my history with Lucas's fabricated day trading career. But unlike the lies of the past, this is real, solid, built on a foundation of honesty that I've fought hard to establish. We're talking about starting a family, a prospect that both excites and terrifies me. Can someone who was capable of such calculated deception be a good mother? It's a question I grapple with daily. As I look towards this new chapter of my life, I can't help but wonder about Lucas. Where is he now? Did our time together change him as it changed me? There are moments when I'm tempted to look him up, to see what became of the man who played such a pivotal role in shaping who I am today. But I resist that urge. The past is the past, and I've worked too hard to build this new life to risk looking back. Instead, I focus on the future, on the family James and I hope to create, on the business I continue to grow. The lessons I learned during those months with Lucas were hard-won and painful. They shaped me in ways I'm still discovering. But as I stand on the precipice of this new life, I realize that those experiences, as difficult as they were, led me here, to this moment, to this version of myself. And for better or worse, this is who I am now. A woman shaped by love, lies, and the long road to redemption.
Hey there, Unraveling Ties family. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. I hope it touched your heart, made you think, or even inspired you in some way. We would love to hear your thoughts and feelings about this story. Don't be shy. Leave a comment below and share your perspective with our community. Your voice matters to us. If you enjoyed today's story and want to be a part of our journey as we unravel the complexities of human relationships, be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. That way, you'll never miss a new story. We're always eager to explore new angles and dive into the themes that resonate with you the most. So tell us, what kind of stories would you like to see in upcoming episodes? Your input helps us create content that you'll love. And hey, if today's story reminded you of a personal experience or a tale you'd like to share, we're all ears. Feel free to share your own stories in the comments. Who knows, your story might even inspire a future Unraveling Ties episode. Once again, thank you for being a part of the Unraveling Ties family. Your support means the world to us. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Until next time, keep embracing the ties that bind us and never stop exploring the depths of the human heart. See you in the next video.